Did you at all feel it was restricting to join a Christian band?
Well, I guess at the time, would have been about 10 years ago. I guess everybody's a lot younger, probably a lot closer to where, you know, where you were as far as how you were raised, you know. So looking back now, I think, you know, everybody is definitely a lot more naive. I think like when I joined the band, I'd say like all five of us have like completely different worldviews than we probably did like, you know, 10 years ago. So, I mean, at the time it didn't seem restricting. Now it definitely would.
What do you think sparked that Christian movement?
I don't know. I think, you know, a lot of things in music, I think come and go in, you know, different kinds of waves. Like, you know, for example, like in hardcore, you see like all of a sudden there's a glut of straight edge bands, and it's like, you know, people that kind of latch on to whatever, they're all of a sudden straight edge, and then whatever, that disappears, and then, you know, maybe there'll be a certain like political, you know, thrust, you know, with like a ton of bands. And I think that was kind of like that with like, you know, Christian music in the 90s and maybe into the early 2000s. There seemed to have been a lot of bands that, you know, were really outspoken about what they believed, and they would do really well. You know, like I think, you know, bands like, for example, like Zao, you know, they were, you know, seen as one of the like premier Christian bands in that sort of genre of hardcore. So I don't know, I guess things just kind of, you know, they get kind of popular and then they die down. Like right now, I don't think it's probably as popular as it once was for like, you know, Christian bands. So I don't know what to put you know, what I could attribute that to, but that's just a simple observation, I think. For another Christian band, for example, that would have had sort of those, like, I guess, crossover punk hardcore metal roots would have been The Crucified. I think they just had their 25th year anniversary. And I remember, like, when I was growing up listening to them, I was like, you know, this is pretty awesome. So I can say for myself that would have influenced me to some degree. But yeah, bands like Agnostic Front, depends how far you go back or whatever, but it would have like kind of, I guess, influenced a lot of that. You know, bands like DOA, Black Flag, I think would have, if you go back, peel back the onion one more layer, it would have, you know, you'd see bands like that as well.
So what were those shows like back then, the small DIY shows?
I guess probably a lot more intimate probably than it is now, because I think there's probably a lot more effort put into finding shows, you know, belonging to a scene. Like now with the internet, it's like, you know, it's not quite as personal. You know, everybody's in contact, but not kind of in the same intimate way as it would have been like 10, 15 years ago. So there definitely would have been that. I don't know, it just, I guess nostalgia, you know, kind of gives you a certain bias, but it just seemed a lot more, lot simpler and a lot more innocent back then, I think. Now I kind of seems like there might be, you know, a little more of an attitude where people have something to prove or this or that. Back then it was just like more just misfits finding a place to fit in.
In the early 2000s, you guys were sending off demos, Comeback Kid demos, to Bridge Nine and Deathwish. Does it feel like that long ago?
Yeah, it seems like quite a while ago. We've done a ton of touring, and I think that really makes things seem really long, you know. Yeah, when we started out, I think we recorded that demo probably in 2001 and just sent it out to a bunch of people. And at the time, you know, people really liked it, but didn't really take us seriously because me and Andrew were, you know, everybody knew we were, you know, super involved with Figure 4, doing that very full time. So people didn't know if we were a for real band or not. So I think if it was just like straight up just us sending out demos and them not knowing that we were in other bands, we probably would have got picked up a lot sooner. But it took a little bit of work at first to get that ball rolling. But eventually, like the label that Figure 4 was on at the time, Face Down, it's like, all right, you know, we'll, you know, we don't have a big budget, but we'll take a chance on it. So that's kind of how that came to be.
Your experience with Figure 4, how did the experience with that band help Comeback Kid with moving that forward?
Well, we just, you know, we were just a very heavily touring band. You know, we just thought it, you know, we just wanted to be on the road at all times. So any tour that came up, we would take it. And that's kind of the attitude that, you know, me and Andrew kind of carried into Comeback Kid. If the tour makes sense, let's do it. You know, we're road dogs, and that's what we love to do. So I think, you know, that probably gave us a lot of contacts, kind of gave us, you know, a good idea of how we should move this band, learning from the mistakes that we may have made with Figure 4, So.
What were some of the mistakes with Figure 4 that you learned with Comeback Kid?
Well, our first international tour outside of North America was in Brazil, and we had no clue what we were getting into. I had lived in Central America for a few years, like when I was a kid, but other than that, nobody had left the continent before, right? So now, obviously, looking back, there were things that we would have done differently. We would have approached, the people that we were working with on that tour differently. But you don't know what you're getting into. So, things like that, it's like, you look back and you're like, how did we even do that? But, luckily we did, and I think we learned a lot from that. And, since then, we've obviously done a lot of international tours with Comeback Kid, but you learn a lot as you go, and you got to jump in the deep end and swim to save your life sometimes.
How has the hardcore music community evolved since that time?
Since that time? Well, I kind of touched on it a bit earlier. I think the internet has played a huge role in kind of, changing the way people get access to new music and whatnot. I remember when I was a kid, it was, just magazines and zines, and you'd see little ads for something that you might be interested in because it might have some crazy, like, if you're into this, this, and this, get this demo, So I think, that was how I'd come across new music and whatnot. Now, like I think MySpace is probably going the way of the dinosaur, but you can access any, everybody's got music on there, everybody's downloading everything. So I think, just access to music in general, that has changed a lot. The scene, I don't know. It seems like it's definitely branched out because, what was considered a hardcore band, in the late 90s, now there's so many subgenres. Like there's, I don't know, I'm 35 years old, I don't know everything that's going on in current hardcore right now, but you know what I mean? Like there's so many different styles that have just really, I guess, splintered off of, the umbrella of hardcore, what I knew of it, like in the mid-late 90s. So, yeah.
If you had to do it all over again at this day and age, what would you do? How would you start a band and move it forward?
Well, I don't think I'd have any huge major changes, but there's definitely things we or I would have tweaked. I guess the main thing is just be willing to give up a lot of what you're used to. Like I miss so many birthdays, weddings, different things that I'd love to be at home for, but you just have to be ready to sacrifice those kind of things if you want to make it happen, because labels and management and that, they don't really want to even look at bands that don't have a proven track record of being on the road. It's like, every band is like, yeah, we just want to go out and tour, and then it's like you have to somehow make that happen. It's just like book your own shows, get in contact with people like kind of outside your area, and just you can't start too big. You're gonna start small and just kind of go from there. Obviously, you have to be able to write songs that people want to hear, and come see you play live as well. But the work ethic is the main thing, because if you can be the greatest band ever, but if you don't put in the effort to start at the bottom and work hard at it, it's a lot of people see you as a risk and they'll want to work with you if you don't have that proven track record.
Do you come across bands that don't have a proven track record that somehow are a product of public relations? And
I don't know any bands personally. I mean, I've seen a lot of bands just like blow up, like it almost seems overnight. And a lot of times, yeah, if you're at the right place at the right time, you can be lucky sometimes. But at the same time, there obviously would have been some work that would have got into that prior. But yeah, and again, with the internet, it's a lot easier for bands to, I think, blow up. Like I'm not 100% sure, but I think like a random example of that would be like Panic at the Disco. I think they just kind of blew up via MySpace without having to put in a lot of groundwork in first. So I guess it is possible to some degree to launch yourself a lot, hit that level. And I guess if someone really believes in you and wants to take that chance, it'll happen. But it's pretty rare.
I totally just had a brain fart.
It happens.
Shit, I was gonna ask something really cool too.
I sense the epicness of it.
I know. Gosh, what were we talking about? We were talking about public relations. Oh, what were your objectives though? Did you have expectations?
The only thing that was actually semi like a hard like goal I personally wanted to be involved with was like being in a band that would sell more than 10,000 records. And other than that, it was just like I just want to be on the road. I love touring. I love just getting to a city I've never been to, or even if I have been there before, just walk around, see it. I love food. I love eating. And just be, that was my whole thing. Is just like I just love the live music environment, and I just wanted to be busy. Like as far as like how big we got or this or that, it wasn't a huge thing, but I just wanted to sell 10,000 records.
Well, what about music and technology? The recording was way different back then, just recording in general.
Yeah, well now, everything's Pro Tools and whatnot. Any kids, super tech savvy kids, they're recording, their albums now. Whereas like before, it was like you had to book studio time at this.
Is that good or bad? Does that hurt bands or does that help bands?
Well, I definitely think for the creative process it's good because it's a lot easier just to get things down, like especially when you're trying to demo stuff before you go in to record a record. It just makes it a lot easier. Now you can just set up a few mics and record on GarageBand and be able to listen to them and see what you need to change, tear down, whatever. Whereas before, it was all on studio time and that cost money. So everybody's got a laptop now. So I think it's definitely for the best.
Do bands abuse technology?
It's yes and no. It really depends on the style of music. Like I prefer like a more organic, sound. I think now, especially like with hardcore and metalcore, everything just is so compressed and like double kick is so triggered and like just it's almost like monotone. There's no like it doesn't seem like anything's breathing anymore with a lot of stuff. But at the same time, that's that also caters to an element of that genre, I guess. I'm just more a fan of nice warm. I'm not necessarily saying analog sound, but just something that sound you can hear sounds real. It wasn't punched like wasn't auto-tuned. Wasn't like it sounds real. I know like everybody punches in. I punch in like 99% of people do, but I think there's a, in my opinion, there's a line that gets crossed when things get compressed to the tits, and it's like just I don't know, it just doesn't sound like what I'm gonna hear live.
Is there a line that you shouldn't cross in terms of recording?
I mean, maybe there's some unspoken rules in some genres.
What about hardcore though?
Hardcore, well, like the hardcore that that I'm into, if I'm going like with a band like Sick of It All or Madball, like Bitter End, something, the heavier, straight up stuff. I mean, I don't want to be an ass and say there should be a line, but I definitely think you're not going to hear the same sort of compression on the guitars and the drums and everything that you're going to hear. I'm not going to start naming bands names that do what I don't like, but there would definitely be a bit of a backlash, I think, with that kind of recording with some of those like bands that are older hardcore, influenced by older hardcore.
What are your thoughts on vinyl, the vinyl format in general versus CDs?
I never collected it, but I have a lot of friends who do. My roommate she's got a ridiculous amount of vinyl. But I get it. I just never really collected it. But yeah, it's it's got its collector's value. It's I think it's a cool format. It's more like I think it used to be more of a novelty kind of thing, but now that CDs are also going the way of the dinosaur, I think between downloads and vinyl, those are going to be the two probably things that are going to, for the time being, stand the test of time, because it's just got this cool sort of stigma about it, I guess.
Do you ever see it being just vinyl with a digital download, like that is the primary format?
I think that's kind of the road a lot of bands have taken, especially smaller bands. Like if they'll put out like a 7-inch or an EP or whatever, 4 or 5 song thing, a lot of times I'll just release it on a 7-inch and digital download, right? They're not gonna put out the CD EP with 4 or 5 songs anymore. So I think that'll probably become more common, I would think, especially if you're doing things on a smaller level, like bands that are on a big level, they're probably still going to be making CDs for the time being. But yeah, your fan base is pretty small, and especially if in hardcore, people collect vinyl, I think that's yeah, it's fair to assume that's what's probably going to happen more.